The WoW Classic team just dropped massive bombs on 2 separate interviews today, one with Scotty J and Mr. GM, and one on the Warcraft Reloaded podcast. So we're going to break down the crazy things like healers and tanks having exclusive chances to get mounts just from healing and tanking dungeons. They're also getting herbs, they're getting their own consumables. We're also seeing things like the answer to, are we still going to have the Joyous Journeys buff? Are we going to continue having that moving on? Random dungeon finder, how's that going to look? Also some really exciting things that could lead towards a potential competitive scene in World of Warcraft Classic. I will touch on that. That is like the most exciting thing ever. And a lot of these things kind of got glossed over in these interviews. So today we're going to go over everything that's really key and really important. That being said, huge shout out to the Warcraft Reloaded podcast and to Scotty J and Mr. Jam on their actual interviews. This was phenomenal, and to the Warcraft team for announcing things with the community and actually having this open communication, this open conversation. So with that being said, let's dive right in. Starting off with the conversation about Ulduar loot getting harder, having the harder versions of Ulduar within the game early on, and so that Ulduar hard mode loot actually is scaled higher than normal Trial of Crusader when Trial of Crusader comes out, kind of giving us an incentive to go back and actually clear Ulduar again on the hard modes. Let's just hear what Chris has to say about that.
One change that we decided to make involving Trial of Crusader and Ulduar is all of the item levels of the items that drop in Ulduar is going to be increased, particularly much more so on the drops from the hard modes, so that Ulduar kind of lasts a little bit longer and competes better with Trial of the Crusader.
Boom! So mainly the hard modes, but all of the loot is getting an eye level increase. We're getting 6 eye level increase. And then the hard modes, it looks like their eye level is going to be what, 251 eye level. And that is going to be crazy powerful. But it was also mentioned in the blue post that because you're only getting 1 extra item from these hard modes, that you might actually see more loot dropping. Chris actually said today in this interview that we might only see that 1 new item dropping. So this one piece from the hard modes that is significantly more powerful than anything else. This will mean some people in certain guilds will get absolutely funneled this gear. It'll be super expensive in GDKPs, but each boss dropping only 1 item per week that is at this higher eye level is crazy, because that means that it's even going to be more coveted to have this 251 eye level gear. We're going to need to do a lot more splits, and also you're going to be fighting. There's going to be a lot of loot drama to see who gets this. But again, I think this is something that's pretty cool, and I think it's kind of exciting to go back during Trial of the Crusader and clear Ulduar for some even better loot if you can get it to drop. Then they dropped the next bomb, which is crazy to hear. Once you move into the next tier, so moving away from Naxxramas into phase 2, where we move into Ulduar, the loot actually from 10 and 25 man Naxxramas is gonna be the exact same. So now you can go back with a 10-man group and clear that and get the loot from the 25-man version. This is a huge catch-up mechanic so that your alts can actually level up and then do the 10-man versions of Naxxramas, which are 1, easier, we'll figure out if they have to scale that, and then 2, it's easier to put together a 10-man group and then just see the loot drop there that is from the 25-man version, the BIS loot there. But then it brings up the question, obviously, what happens to the loot that you were getting from 10-man versions? And this is what I think is leading to the best thing that was dropped today in general, that leaves so many open questions that we really need to ask. But what they're going to do with the 10-man loot, because some of those pieces are currently actually BIS, even in phase 1, some of the items from 10-man are better than the 25-man loot if they're itemized differently for some classes. So what's going to happen with that loot?
Those are going to move to drops in the heroic dungeons from an increased difficulty. You'll be able to increase the difficulty of heroic dungeons to get better drops and more badges, more emblems, I should say, off the bosses. It's a change we're making. It's borrowing a little bit from the future game, but we think it's going to be really exciting and give all of that content more room to live and grow and be relevant.
Heroic Plus was literally just confirmed. Heroic Plus, guys. That means you're going to be able to go back into heroic dungeons, increase the difficulty, and get new loot from there. This is so exciting because, in my opinion, this is definitely a based opinion, one of the best aspects of retail is their Mythic Plus system. This is absolutely some sort of little competitive system that is kind of gatekept in retail realistically, and that's something that I really don't want to see anywhere near Classic. But just the idea of having small speedruns that you can do every day just for fun would be so exciting. So just Heroic Plus is kind of a medium ground right now, where we're kind of seeing the dungeons be a little bit harder, but you go in and you get more emblems, and you also go in and get your 10-man loot from the last raid tier. This will keep the heroics relevant, but necessarily mostly for alts. Most people will be just focusing on the new raid tiers, so this is also just a thing that mostly will be for alts other than getting extra badges, which is more of a catch-up mechanic. But this opens the door towards looking towards any sort of competitive scene. And I was literally working on this video with my boy Ruggs about adding some sort of competitive scene in the raiding and also official competitive scene within the actual dungeons. Now, the big thing for that would be absolutely that it wouldn't give you some sort of advantage over other players, so it's not like a gate-kept scene. But if you could go into dungeons and see a little leaderboard or add some little challenges and maybe eventually win a mount or a title or something like that, that again doesn't give you any sort of advantage over other players, I think it would be one of the most fun aspects of the game possible. And I'm not going to go too deep into this because there's mixed reviews on if people like Mythic Plus or anything like that, or want to play competitively or not. I just think if there is an option where some people can go and compete against themselves, there's always going to be a lot of fun. And the speed running scene in Classic is exactly the perfect place for that. There's so many people that run speed runs, but you can only run one raid a week. And if there was world buffs back in the day, it was only one raid a month for speed runs. But if you could just log on and actually, instead of being raid logged or leveling alt, you could just do some harder dungeons and go for a better time purely for a competitive nature and to add a fun aspect or a little mini esport into World of Warcraft Classic. This could be golden, and this could bring so many people to the game, but also it wouldn't punish you whatsoever for not doing it. So let me know in the comments what you think about this. This is my personal opinion. I am always really someone that really likes the version of something competitive in any game. Speedruns are always the thing in WoW Classic, and if there is a competitive scene and it's built out correctly and done well, it always has this sort of trickle down effect where it's not necessarily hurting you again for not doing them, but it is something that's fun to watch or fun to participate in, and it's easy to do and could be a nice little challenge for you, because when you're in phase 1, you're pretty much just chilling. Naxxramas is the only thing you're doing, and I guess it's just leveling more alts. This segues actually into the next thing, which is random dungeon finder was brought up. Now, I'm sure you all have gripes of your own against the current dungeon finder system. It is mostly DPS, of course. You are going to find intermittently some tanks and healers, but the current dungeon finder system is kind of like something that is very contentious right now. And a lot of people are using things like Groupie or LFG bulletin board still, just so that they don't have to use this. Blizzard did say that they are kind of doubling down on this system, saying that they're trying to find ways to make it work better. So they are not looking to give us random dungeon finder, but what they are looking to give us is actually give you rewards for playing tanks and healers in dungeons. So if you're a tank or healer in a Northrend dungeon, after you kill the last boss in that dungeon, you're actually getting a bag of rewards. And this is something we actually saw on the beta already, where tanks and healers were getting bags of rewards that gave you literally multiple flasks, multiple potions, and also herbs or mining reagents. And just getting herbs is going to make Darkmoon Card Greatness go down in price, so that's kind of nice, but that's not the only things you can get. Here we go.
The algorithm that I've put together identifies you were the tank or you were the healer. You will receive an extra reward bag. The reward bag will contain consumables, as well as a small chance at a pet or mount.
As well as a small chance of a pet or mount. This was the biggest boom of the interview right now. What? You can queue as a tank or healer all day, or not even queue. You just group up with your friends and run dungeons as a tank or healer. And the mounts they're looking at are exclusively from the last expansions. So we're looking at things like Baron Rivendeer's Charger without having to go farm that. He also mentioned the Anzu mount. which is the Ravenlord mount, which is beautiful, but also potentially the Kel'Thas mount. I'm not sure which mounts are all included in this, but this is crazy because it only applies to tanks and healers getting free chances to win mounts at the end of every dungeon. Something like 1% chance still means you're pretty much eventually going to get all of the mounts throughout your time in Wrath of the Lich King. This is a huge advantage to queue for tank or healer, and anyone that has that off spec is pretty much going to almost exclusively queue this way because one, you're going to make a ton of gold from flasks, herbs, mining nodes, but also you have a chance to get your mounts. But it kind of punishes some of the classes that don't have a tank or healer off spec where they need to go out and farm those mounts themselves. But the justification is that if tanks and healers aren't farming the mounts from older contents, if they're not like going out and mount collecting, then they will be queuing for heroic dungeons, which is kind of a nice middle ground. I'm curious what you guys think. And the last big thing from the interviews today was the Joyous Journeys buff. It was asked in both interviews if the Joyous Journeys 50% XP buff would remain in the game in Wrath of the Lich King, because a lot of people are really liking this buff. It's making leveling a lot more fun, and it's actually been pretty relaxing. Well, they did say that they are taking this out, but they have seen a lot of positive receptions to this buff, so it might come back into play later on in the expansion. And that's everything I think is super important that came out of the interviews today. I think that the Heroic Plus idea is so exciting, and I really hope that they look towards doing something a little bit competitive within the actual World of Warcraft scene for Classic. That would be so fun, and we could even have a literal esport in WoW Classic. So let's see how that goes. This is going to be so hype, guys, and I'll see you guys all in Northrend.